McDonald's has Wendy's, Walmart has Target, iOS has Android. These are just a few examples of big names competing in the same space. Brand competition as a whole is nothing new, and is often rather healthy. But for it to be truly competitive, the competing parties must bring something of equal value to the table. So, what does this all have to do with Alaskan Road Truckers? Well, this ambitious new big rig sim seeks to plant a flag in territory that has long been practically conquered by the likes of SES Software and its lengthy portfolio of truck simulators. Today, SES wields two sister sims, American Truck Simulator and Euro Truck Simulator 2, and each of them have been progressively improving over the last several years. Within that time, new challengers like Alaskan Road Truckers have risen, yet for the most part, SES position has yet to be toppled. It appears that's for good reason. There's still just not much of a fight to be had here. Alaskan Road Truckers seems to want to occupy a space that's being filled not even just by SES, but also that of Saber Interactive with its Runner franchise. Spun off from Spin Tires, Saber has gone on to release MudRunner and SnowRunner. These driving sims show the other side of trucking, with a focus on navigating dangerous off-road environments. Saber has crafted a beautifully complex physics system that does a stellar job at simulating proper weight distribution, terrain deformation, and authentic off-road driving. On paper then, Alaskan Road Truckers would seem to have a gameplay formula that fuses the likes of the on-road sims from SES with the off-road sims from Saber. Yet, as alluded to earlier, this game doesn't quite match up to either. The core of the sim, the driving mechanics, are perhaps the least impressive element. The starter truck feels exceptionally heavy. Admittedly, that should be a good thing, but what this translates to is very slow, lumbering, wide turns. There should be a nice middle ground between feeling heavier than a standard car, but also not feeling like trying to maneuver a cinder block with wheels. Very surprisingly, I discovered that keyboard steering is somehow better than that of using a gamepad. It's exactly opposite of how it should be. The steering sensitivity when using an analog stick is just too high, and currently there's no way to make any adjustments. Rather, when driving, making proper incremental adjustments are better made with the keyboard, though I still stubbornly decided to stick with a gamepad just to try and make things work. While I mostly managed, there were quite a few times where trying to make a sharp turn led to me careening off the side of the road. Sometimes this happened due to bad controls, and even bad physics arguably. But other times, it was just a result of shoddy AI traffic. Honestly, it seems like these guys have bought their licenses from the black market. From getting brake checked, to cars going well under the speed limit, to just coming to completely random stops, driving with traffic here in Alaskan Road Truckers feels more treacherous than the weather hazards. And speaking of, more on that in just a bit. But back to the traffic problem, it's further exacerbated by the game's strange speed limit implementations. Short sections of the road near intersections will typically go from 55 to just 15 miles an hour, and with the AI traffic being so poorly coded, this is often what triggers the sudden, unnecessary stops as mentioned before. When they weren't ruining my life, they'd also mess themselves up by getting stuck on terrain, crashing into signs, and even crashing into each other. Now shifting gears back to the topic of driving mechanics and the handling of the weather, herein comes a reflection of Alaskan Road Truckers' representation of Alaska's terrain. While the state's fairly moderate road system is somewhat represented here, you'd be hard-pressed to find much of a difference in driving conditions at any given time. A good chunk of the roads in the game are paved, but there are also what should be the more technical moments where you encounter unpaved sections. Yes, they are present, but truthfully, I observe no real difference in handling. Even after snow fell on the road and it was blanketed, my truck just simply continued to trudge along without any extra consideration. Seeing that the game's pretty basic customization / upgrade system allows you to pick between sets of tires with different attributes, including those that are supposedly meant to perform better in certain conditions, and there's even an option to put chains on your tires, one would think that the driving mechanics would be able to reflect all of these different factors. but alas, it's all just incredibly rudimentary. Even if the road surface is merely wet from rain, you're really not going to experience any more difficulty driving than usual. An accurate representation of these very different driving conditions should make up a huge part of Alaskan Road Truckers' formula. Thus, its absence instead makes the experience feel incredibly hollow. But unfortunately, this isn't even the only area where the game is lacking. It wasn't until noticing the absence of certain smaller details in Alaskan Road Truckers did I appreciate their presence in the SCS sims. For instance, in those titles, before setting off to take a job, you get a rundown of the goods to carry and their weight. Heavier loads will even warn you to make sure your truck is up to the task before proceeding. Here in Alaskan Road Truckers, however, while you do get a similar briefing for different cargo types, there's never any mention of weight. Thus, it should come as no surprise that it never really seemed to matter, given how we just discussed the fairly simple driving mechanics that the game possesses. The omission of this isn't just a fact of mere missing lines of text, it's reflective in the gameplay. For instance, hauling a dense tanker trailer should feel different than hauling a trailer filled with, say, used tires. It should also go without saying that the runner titles do perhaps the most fantastic job at reflecting weight differences in cargo and the intricacies that come with transporting different types. The risk of tipping a log trailer, for instance, is higher due to needing to then have to pick all of them up, versus a tanker that has a cap. None of these differences matter in Alaskan Road Truckers, however. On a similar note, your truck's power also doesn't seem to make much of a difference here. While in the beginning, your available license only allows you to move certain types of cargo, there's nothing that ever seems to factor in the actual capabilities of your truck. Therefore, as you complete missions and slowly build your funds and XP, there's hardly much incentive to put any effort into reaching for better equipment. This is a fundamental pillar of any driving game. You start small and basic and then work your way up to bigger and better. Thus, the lack of rewarding progression is head-scratching to say the least. Earning XP allows you to unlock aspects of various skill trees, although they mostly just include minor buffs such as less fuel consumption, for instance. This is similar to that of the truck sims like SCS, though earning XP here in Alaskan Road Truckers seems to take longer. As for the use of funds, while a single job will certainly net you a few thousand upon completion, it's fairly easy to have a lot of it slip away when needing to make repairs and buy supplies for yourself and your truck. Here's where, at the very least, Alaskan Road Truckers does show the brightest of its promise. The standout feature of this game is perhaps, well, the fact that you're allowed to stand. Not just that, your character can walk about, use their hands, and interact with objects. Rather than being confined to the cabin and merely taking care of non-driving tasks through a series of menus, this game actually invites you to do things like pumping gas yourself, fix broken parts on your truck, and stuff your invisible face with necessary food to keep hunger at bay. Having to manage these more minor tasks in a pragmatic way is a breath of fresh Alaskan air. For whatever reason, so many driving sims opt to keep the action centered on the vehicle itself. That's why when you actually get to be able to flick the door open and touch virtual grass and gravel, it's very interesting to see just how much you're able to do in that state. I do enjoy the hands-on aspect of this title, and none of it really seems to get in the way of the rest of the experience. You mostly just need to keep your character well fed, warmed, and rested, and then take care of the needs of your truck. All of this breaks up the monotony of simply just driving from point A to point B. But, alas, my praise for Alaskan Road Truckers can only go so far, because anytime I was done maneuvering about on foot, it was back to slogging through the rest of the game on the road. If the poor driving mechanics and janky AI weren't already egregious, there's a lot of other aspects of this game that has issues, from its technical bugs to just plain old odd design choices. Here are just some examples of what I've encountered. Sometimes while fixing a part, an annoying wrench sound effect would keep looping long after the task was done. When taking a break from one of my sessions, I saved and exited the game with completely regular, clear weather. When I booted it up again, the time had remained the same, my position had remained the same, but the world was blanketed with snow out of scenic nowhere. As for the odd design choices, the only NPCs in the game's drabby map are odd-looking models that are job managers you need to speak to, if not store clerks. I say they're all odd-looking because they all seem to be pulled from a pack of pre-created models, and the outfits that they're wearing don't fit the theme or weather conditions of the world that they live in. Now this segues into the world design itself. While the look and feel of Virtual Alaska in this title is somewhat accurate given the ruggedness that the state is known for, Alaskan Road Truckers is by no means trying to go as in-depth as what the talented scenery designers at SES have been putting together over the last few years. Various points of interest are even littered about the map for you to stop and take pictures of, but none of them really seem to be anything to write home about. Beyond that, just the game's general world design seemed flat and dull. I can't really quite put my finger on it, but it all just came off as lacking depth to me. Perhaps it could be due to a lack of elevation or the sameness of the scenery. Either way, there just isn't much visual flavor on offer here. Alaska in real life is gorgeous, and while there were a few tranquil moments when I appreciated the game's attempt at beauty, it often just felt that I was looking at a crude dollar store brand version of what's supposed to be present. Getting around this hollow rendition of Alaska is also a bit of a doozy considering that the minimap, strangely, has 0 icons. Confusingly, you have to open up the main map to see where everything is and then set a course to it. For instance, I mentioned earlier how many truck repairs can be done while on foot, but major repairs will still call for having to take your truck to a workshop. As the map shows, there are only about 4 truck workshop locations across the entire map, and that includes your HQ. Considering the vast distances between each of these locations, here's hoping you don't randomly hit a stopped vehicle too hard so as to need a major repair while out making a delivery. While roadside assistance can be called to fetch your truck in emergencies, that of course comes at a very steep fee, and it also comes with the added inconvenience of having to start a brand new journey, perhaps even covering ground that you would have just driven through. With all of these complaints and negative observations in mind then, it is interesting about the way that the developers have gone about handling this. Since its release a few days ago, the game has already received 4 updates that address issues that have been found by players. In fact, that 4th update was just released just before I published this review. On one hand, this determination does bode well for squashing the plethora of bugs that I've mentioned and that other players have found, and hopefully it'll also lead to revamping many of the lackluster design choices. Also, the devs have even promised to outfit the game with more content in the near future. These efforts so far do provide hopeful prospects for Alaskan Road Truckers, but first impressions certainly do matter. Thus, as is always the case, when a game releases in such a semi-broken and buggy state with the objective of fixing it later, it all just ends up being confusing and a little disheartening. For myself, I wanted to do a complete full in-game year to get a proper perspective of the whole experience, but because of all the issues I just mentioned, and especially once I was completely let down by that random snowfall mentioned earlier, after just a dozen hours of playing, I figured I'd seen enough. While Alaskan Road Truckers is far from being the worst title to hit the truck sim genre, it does come off as overpromising while under-delivering. There's room to turn things around and forge a better path, but that's not the ideal way to try and build a following around a new product. SES and Saber Interactive both occupy their respective corners of the truck sim genre with great force, and each have a dedicated fan base that proves that. Their sims certainly aren't perfect, but they're certainly very well put together. Why would any player then bother looking elsewhere or waiting for something new to get good if the better offerings are already ripe for the picking? Thus, I've said it once here before and I'll say it once more. Road Studio has its work cut out for it. Certainly, there's potential here with Alaskan Road Truckers, and I hope it's built upon sooner rather than later. But, for the time being, this truck sim is better left in the shed. A big thank you to you for watching this review of Alaskan Road Truckers here on Extreme Azure. Before you go, I'd like to invite you to head on over to GameScout, link in the description, to read up on more reviews as well as gaming news, articles, and more from me, AK, and the rest of the team. Thank you again, and I'll be seeing you around.